Two guys, two empires, two completely different ways of getting to the top. One was born into it, raised around violence, loyalty, and blood money before he could even drive. The other stumbled into it at 50 years old, dying of cancer, with a chemistry degree and absolutely nothing left to lose. Tony Soprano ran one of the most powerful crime families on the East Coast for decades. Walter White built a meth empire from a broken-down RV in the New Mexico desert in less than 2 years. And today we're asking the question that every fan of prestige TV has thought about at least once. Who actually built the better empire? We're breaking this down across 6 categories: organization, money, loyalty, law enforcement heat, legacy, and the fall. And by the end of this video, we're crowning a winner. Let's get into it. Round 1. Organization. Let's start with how each man actually structured his operation, because this is where the two are fundamentally different from day one. Tony Soprano didn't build the daimyo crime family. He inherited it. The infrastructure was already there. Captains, soldiers, associates, a decades-old hierarchy that ran like a corporation with violence as its enforcement arm. Tony's genius wasn't construction, it was management, keeping volatile, paranoid, ego-driven men in line while simultaneously dealing with FBI pressure, rival families, and his own psychological collapse. And honestly, he was exceptional at it. Tony understood power the way most people understand breathing, instinctively, without thinking. He knew which guys needed fear, which ones needed money, and which ones needed to feel respected just enough to stay loyal. He ran his operation through the bada bing, through sTheRealKing, through layers of insulation that kept him at arm's length from the actual crimes being committed. The Soprano organization had waste management fronts, construction contracts, garbage routes, and union infiltration. It was a legitimate-looking machine with criminal wiring underneath. Decades of relationships, corrupt officials, and legal cover made it almost impossible to dismantle cleanly. Walter White, on the other hand, built everything from scratch. And y'all, that is insane when you actually think about it. He started with literally nothing. No connections, no infrastructure, no criminal network, just a dying chemistry teacher and his former student cooking product in a beat-up RV in the desert. Within 2 years, Walt had gone from that RV to running a distribution operation out of a pest control company, cooking inside tented suburban homes while regular employees had absolutely no idea what was happening under those tarps. The Vamonos Pest setup alone was one of the smartest operational moves in TV history. He didn't hide in a warehouse or underground bunker. He hid in plain sight right in the middle of residential neighborhoods using a legitimate business as cover. Neighbors smelled chemicals and assumed it was bug treatment. Genius. But here's the difference. Tony's organization had depth, layers of management, redundancy, and institutional knowledge built over generations. If Tony disappeared tomorrow, the family would keep running. Walt's operation was always one person deep. Everything ran through him. His chemistry, his decisions, his relationships. Remove Walt, and the whole thing collapses immediately. Round 1 goes to Tony Soprano. His organization had generational infrastructure that Walt's empire could never match. Walt built something impressive from nothing, but Tony built something that was designed to survive without him. Round 2. The money. This one is closer than you'd think. The Soprano family's revenue streams were massive and diversified. Loan sharking, gambling, construction kickbacks, garbage routes, union corruption, hijacking, prostitution. The family was pulling in millions across multiple industries simultaneously. Tony personally skimmed from every operation his guys ran, taking a percentage off the top of everything. But here's the thing about mob money. It's messy, distributed, and incredibly hard to scale cleanly. Tony was constantly fighting over percentages, dealing with guys skimming from him, managing beefs over territory, and watching his income get eaten by legal fees, FBI pressure, and the cost of keeping everyone paid and quiet. The money was real, but it was also constantly leaking. Walter White's operation was streamlined in a way that Tony's never was. At peak production, cooking inside the super lab under Gus Fring, Walt and Jesse were producing 200 pounds of meth per week. Jesse did the math himself and nearly fell out of his chair. 200 pounds a week for 3 months. 2,400 pounds total. At $40,000 a pound wholesale, That's $96 million. And Walt instantly corrected him, because the street price was nearly double that figure. Walt knew exactly what his 99.1% pure product was worth, and he used that knowledge as leverage. When Walt and Jesse later ran their own operation through Vamonos Pest, Walt calculated their gross revenue to the exact dollar in his head without a calculator. $1,379,560. Based on the precise yield weight from that cook, multiplied by the wholesale price minus the standard dealer cut. Instant. Flawless. The difference is that Tony spread his money across dozens of guys and operations. Walt concentrated his product into a single world-class commodity that nobody else could replicate. His 99.1% purity wasn't just a statistic, it was a monopoly. In the meth world, Walt's blue product was the only thing of its kind on the market. That's not just a drug operation. That's a brand. Tony made more total money over his lifetime, but Walt generated more concentrated scalable revenue per operation in a fraction of the time. Round 2 is a draw. Tony wins on total volume and longevity. Walt wins on efficiency, scalability, and the sheer insanity of what he built in under 2 years from a standing start. Round 3. Loyalty. And this is where things get really interesting because both of these men had serious loyalty problems, just in completely different ways. Tony Soprano operated inside a culture where loyalty was the foundational rule. Omerta, the code of silence. You don't talk to the feds, you don't betray the family, you take your punishment and you do your time. And for a long time, that code held. But Tony's real loyalty problem wasn't external, it was internal. The people closest to him kept betraying him in ways that cut deeper than any federal investigation. Paulie Walnuts flirted with switching sides to New York. Christopher Moltisanti, Tony's own nephew and chosen successor, was a recovering addict who became an FBI informant. And Pussy Bonpensiero, one of Tony's oldest and closest friends, had been wearing a wire for the feds for years before Tony finally had to take him out on a boat in the middle of the ocean. Tony's loyalty crisis was personal. These were men he loved, men he trusted with his life, and they kept letting him down in ways that destroyed him psychologically as much as operationally. Walter White's loyalty problem was different. Walt didn't have a crew built on decades of relationships and shared history. He had Jesse, and the relationship between Walt and Jesse is one of the most complicated dynamics in television history. Jesse was loyal to Walt in a way that bordered on unconditional for most of the show, even when Walt manipulated him, lied to him, and used him as a tool. Even when Walt let Jane die rather than save her because she was pulling Jesse away from the operation. Jesse kept coming back, until he didn't. The moment Jesse figured out that Walt had poisoned Brock, a child, to manipulate Jesse's emotions and redirect his rage toward Gus Fring, that was the end. That wasn't a loyalty problem Walt could talk his way out of. That was the moment Jesse became Walt's greatest threat. And outside of Jesse, Walt's loyalty problem was structural. Every person in his network was a potential weak point. Skyler knew too much. Saul was a survivor first and an ally second. Mike trusted no one, including Walt. Todd was loyal but dangerously careless. Lydia was paranoid and empire-hungry. Walt's network was built on mutual self-interest and fear, not genuine loyalty. And mutual self-interest only holds until someone gets a better offer or gets scared enough to flip. Tony at least had men who genuinely loved him, even if some of them ultimately betrayed him. Walt had associates who needed him. That's a fundamentally weaker foundation. Round 3 goes to Tony Soprano. Mob loyalty, even with its cracks and betrayals, ran deeper and lasted longer than anything Walt managed to build. Round 4. Handling law enforcement. Both of these men had federal heat on them for extended periods of time, but the way they handled it couldn't be more different. Tony Soprano dealt with FBI surveillance for the entire run of the show, bugs in the beta Bing, wires on his closest associates, undercover operatives, grand jury subpoenas, and Tony navigated all of it through a combination of legal insulation, plausible deniability, and a team of lawyers who made sure nothing ever stuck. His greatest defensive weapon was structure. Tony never directly ordered hits in rooms with witnesses. He spoke in vague terms, used implication and gesture, and let his captains interpret his meaning. The FBI knew exactly what Tony was doing. They just couldn't prove it cleanly enough to put him away for good. For years. Walter White's approach to law enforcement was more reactive and more creative. When Hank tracked the RV to the junkyard and was literally seconds away from breaking the door down, Walt stayed completely calm and whispered Jesse the exact legal defense he needed word for word. He knew the law well enough to use it as a weapon in real time, under extreme pressure, with a DEA agent pounding on the door 3 feet away from him. And when Hank finally figured out Walt was Heisenberg and confronted him in the garage, Walt didn't panic. He looked a hardened DEA agent in the eyes and told him to tread lightly. Then he filmed a fake confession tape framing Hank as the true criminal mastermind, using the $177,000 of drug money that had paid for Hank's medical rehabilitation as hard evidence. That is a level of cold, calculated ruthlessness that even Tony Soprano would respect. But Walt's biggest law enforcement problem was that he kept leaving trails: the gas mask with school property markings, the melted bathtub full of acid and human remains dripping through Jesse's ceiling, running over 2 drug dealers in broad daylight. Each mistake was survivable on its own. Together they built a case that only stayed quiet because of extraordinary luck and Hank's family connection. Tony's operation was designed from the ground up to survive federal scrutiny. Walt's operation was built for chemistry, not cover. He was brilliant at improvising his way out of situations, but he was never as clean as Tony was institutionally. Round 4 goes to Tony Soprano. Decades of operating under federal surveillance built organizational discipline that Walt's improvised empire never developed. Round 5, the legacy. Here's where Walter White pulls away. Tony Soprano's legacy inside the mob world is complicated. He kept the DeMeo family alive through one of the most difficult periods in organized crime history. He navigated New York's aggression, federal pressure, internal rebellions, and his own mental health crisis simultaneously. That is genuinely impressive. But outside of New Jersey mob circles, Tony's empire left almost no mark on the world. When Tony dies, the family restructures, the money keeps moving, and life goes on. Tony was always replaceable because the institution existed before him and would exist after him. Walter White's legacy is something else entirely. Walt didn't just build an empire. He built a product so pure and so distinctive that it became a legend while he was still alive. The blue meth wasn't just a drug. It was a calling card, a signature, something that had never existed before Walt and would never exist again after him. His 99.1% purity rate wasn't a manufacturing detail, it was a statement of identity, and Walt understood his own legacy in a way that Tony never fully did. Tony always wrestled with what he was: the therapy sessions, the depression, the ducks in the pool. Tony spent the entire show trying to reconcile his violent criminal life with some idea of the good man he might have been. Walt made a different choice. He looked his legacy in the face and owned it completely. I did it for me, I liked it, I was good at it, and I was alive. That scene with Skyler in the final episode is one of the most honest moments in television history. Walt stopped pretending. He wasn't doing it for his family, he was doing it because for the first time in his life, he felt like himself. And that clarity, however dark, is something Tony Soprano never found. Walt also engineered his own exit with the same precision he brought to everything else. The laser pointer bluff that terrified Gretchen and Elliot into protecting his son's financial future. The ricin swap in Lydia's stevia packet at the cafe. The automated M60 mounted in the trunk of his car that wiped out an entire armed compound while he was standing inside it. Walt didn't just end his empire, he dismantled every loose end with surgical precision on his way out the door. Tony's ending was a cut to black. Ambiguous, unresolved. Walt's ending was a final act of complete control. Round 5 goes to Walter White. His legacy was singular, intentional, and entirely his own in a way that Tony's never was. Round 6, the fall. Every empire ends. The question is how. Tony Soprano's fall, if it even was a fall, happened in a diner booth. To the sound of Journey, whether he died or not is a debate that's been running since 2007, and honestly, that ambiguity is the point. Tony's end wasn't clean, it wasn't earned in any traditional narrative sense, it was just life stopping mid-sentence the way it actually does. The FBI was closing in, his nephew was dead, his closest friend had turned informant years earlier, the people around the table in that diner may or may not have been there to kill him. We will never know. And Tony's entire life was built on that kind of unresolved tension. Walter White's fall was operatic. Everything he built collapsed in the most Walt White way possible, through his own pride and his own choices. His ego made him keep cooking when he should have stopped. His pride made him destroy Hank's investigation instead of walking away. His need for control made him order the hit that cost him Jesse's loyalty forever. And yet his final act wasn't failure, it was completion. Walt died on his own terms, in the lab, with his hand on the equipment that made him who he was. He got Jesse out. He protected his family's financial future. He eliminated every person who had wronged him or threatened the people he loved. He told the truth to Skylar for the first time in years. Tony built something that outlasted him but never fully belonged to him. Walt built something that was entirely his, burned it completely to the ground, and walked into the ashes standing up. Round 6 goes to Walter White. Tony wins on structure, longevity, and institutional power. Walt wins on innovation, legacy, and the sheer audacity of what he built from nothing in less time than most people spend paying off a car. So who built the better empire? Tony Soprano built an empire that was designed to last. Walter White built an empire that was designed to matter. And depending on what you think an empire is actually for, survival or significance, that answer is going to be different for every single person watching this video. So let me know in the comments. Tony or Walt, who ran the better operation? Who would you rather have working for you? And who would you absolutely never want as an enemy? And if you want to see more breakdowns like this one, check out the video right here. It is a banger, I promise you. I will be there, and I hope to see you there too. Thank you all so much for watching, commenting, and have a good one. Bye-bye.